What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Martian MMA podcast. I am the Martian, also known as John, here to talk about this week's UFC card. Going down in Perth, Western Australia, 12 fights headlined by the middleweight championship fight between Dricus du Plessis taking on Adesanya in a great fight there with an interesting little bit of a rivalry. The former champ Adesanya taking on DDP to see who the king of Africa is. They're fighting in Australia to determine who the king of Africa is, so that's going to be a fun one there. And just top to bottom, I think the card's pretty fun and interesting. A lot of Anzac fighters on the card, and some of them being given favorable matchups, some of them not so much. And I'm interested to see how this one will play out. You got to be aware that a lot of these fights are being, favorably matched for the hometown fighters. So there are some underdogs I'm looking to avoid, some that I have some faith in. But the UFC, honestly, they didn't really give this card a complete layup for the hometown fighters. Like the London cards, the UK cards, we tend to see them very, very favorably matched in favor of the hometown fighters. This card, not so much, Tuivasa is the underdog. Hooker is the underdog. You got an Australia versus Australia co-main event. So they're not really giving them as much of an easy path as some of the past, regional cards. So I like to see that. I like to see a little more interesting matchups. There are a few mismatches, of course, but overall, top to bottom, I find the card interesting. There are some betting spots I'm looking forward to talking about here. In terms of last week, it was a short card, 10-fight card. Just an okay week of predictions for me. Was right on some, wrong on some, just like all weeks. Carl Williams and Martian Links were the money line spots I was on, where I was, pretty dead wrong about those. Predicted some fights well. The co-main event, the Mariscal and Jackson one, I was on the over pretty confidently there, so that was probably the most accurate prediction I had there. But just predicted some other obvious outcomes: Luciano Rosa by decision, the Chandler Santos fight going the distance. Just nothing. I wasn't really planting my flag on many spots, but the ones I did, I would say I went 1 for 2 on. Just an okay week there, and we're just in the middle of a slow stretch of UFC cards here. This week is definitely a bright note, and hopefully it can continue the rest of the momentum for the rest of the year, and keep the good cards going, and hopefully get some good betting spots and some underdogs waking up as always. Let's hope to get that. But enough about last week, and we're gonna go ahead and get into these fights. And the first fight is in the flyweight division. We have Stuart Nicoll making his UFC debut, taking on Jenkins-Aguilar. Odds for this one, -229 for Nicoll, +194 for Aguilar. Nicoll is predominantly a grappler. He has fought pretty low-level competition, and in every one of those fights, he looks for takedowns, he hits the takedowns, and he does okay work from top position, but he's fighting really bad competition. The guys are going down very easily, and he hasn't really faced much, if any, resistance in his career so far. So definitely a very fraud type of fighter, but he's fighting Jenkins-Aguilar, who is a tiny little guy who is not good at stopping grappling, probably one of the worst flyweights on the roster. And I think they're trying to give Stewart a W here, and I'm just not interested in Aguilar pre-fight, because I just watched his fights and how easily he gets taken down. You watch the Mendoza fight, man. He gets taken down 4, 5, 6 times in that fight, and he just doesn't provide any resistance. He isn't a total fish on bottom. He does know how to stay safe, defend, maybe work his way up, or even work his way to a reversal. But I think Nicoll's definitely taking him down early on here, and he's going to win the early portions of the fight, and the live line is going to blow out in favor of Nicoll. So if you like Aguilar, I would recommend waiting and just seeing how he deals with the first few takedowns, because there's a good chance he's a +500 underdog within the first round because he's getting taken down. So I'll look to see how he's doing, see how he's defending the takedowns. If he's showing signs of life, if he's making Nicoll work, then I'll look to fire a live bet, because Nicoll hasn't faced much resistance, and he certainly isn't comfortable on the feet for long periods. So it could look similar to the Mendoza fight with Aguilar, where it's a back and forth grappling affair, but I don't know. I have no faith in Aguilar to be able to stop the takedowns, and he's just a really weak fighter. So I think Nicoll's going to get him down early, and he's probably going to have his way with Aguilar. And I think Nicoll will honestly win. I think this guy's a fade, But guys, you got to know when the right time to fade him is, and I think Aguilar is probably one of the worst suited guys to fade him with. So I'll be passing on this one. I think Aguilar will survive the top game of Nicoll, so I think this one will hit the scorecards. The GTD is priced at -130. I think that's probably a good way to play the fight, playing the over or the GTD. I think those bets both have a little bit of value on them. But not going to be stamping anything on this fight, and I think it'll be an underwhelming Nicoll decision. And we're moving on to the welterweight division. Song Kanon taking on Ricky Glenn. Odds for this one, -180 Song, +155 Glenn. We got Glenn moving up to 170 here, coming off of 2 knockout losses. And this is also the first time Glenn has ever fought outside of North America. It's his 33rd pro fight, first time ever fighting outside of the US and Canada. And he's going up to welterweight. He's a former featherweight as well, too. So, in my opinion, guys, the writing is on the wall for Rick Glenn getting out of MMA, right? He's going up to lightweight. He's now going up to welterweight. He's got knocked out twice, and I just don't think there's any good signs for Ricky Glenn here, man. 35 years old. He had gone his whole career without getting knocked out, and in his past 2 fights, he got knocked out pretty easily in them. So I just think he's not trying as hard, or he's physically declined, maybe a bit of both. And I just have no interest in betting Rick Glenn. And I think, just fading Glenn with Song at -180, a little less than 65%, I think is fine, honestly. It's not a play that absolutely jumps out as a must bet to me, but I just think the potential that Song hits him a few times and Glenn turtles up and doesn't want anything to do with fighting back, I think is very possible. So I think Song has such a decent chance at knocking him out in the first round here. I think that the 65% is playable for Song. So that's the only way I would be looking to play the fight, is Song money line. And you're probably better off just sticking with money line instead of KO, because KO is not really priced too favorably there. So I think it'll be a Song KO 1 there. We are moving on to the lightweight division. Tom Nolan, Alex Reyes. Odds for this one, Nolan -1150, Reyes +750. Nolan has had a very underwhelming start to his UFC career. I mean, this guy is just a reckless, all-offense fighter. He has no concept of defense, no concept of pacing himself or taking his time. He just goes out there throwing bombs, looking to kill you, and he's not aware of the strikes coming back at him at all. And that led to him getting knocked out by Moda. It even led to him getting dropped by bum Victor Martinez in that fight. So Reyes is not good, a punching bag. The guy hasn't even won a fight in, I think, 8 years or something like that. 2017 was his last win. So 7 years almost to the day for his last win, and he just looked terrible versus Charlie Campbell. But I think Charlie Campbell is a better overall fighter than Nolan, a little more proven, and there's just no way that you can obviously bet Nolan. I mean, nothing is playable with Nolan at his prices. With how reckless and defensively void he is, there's no possible angle for betting Nolan. And I wouldn't knock a stab on, I actually bet on myself, Reyes KO1 +3,200, right? We just saw Nolan get knocked out in round 1. We just saw him get dropped by a bum in round 1. Reyes is a bum. Who's to say he can't possibly drop Nolan in one of these wild exchanges or something like that as well? So low-level mismatch type of fight there. Nolan probably gets through. He probably is going to knock him out in 2 minutes or something. But I'm down to play a little roll of the dice at 32-1. Basically, just spin on the roulette table. You might as well just take a roulette number at 35-1 for basically the same chances. But we're moving on to the featherweight division. Jack Jenkins taking on Herbert Burns. Odds for this one, -700 Jenkins, +500 Burns. Another mismatch type of fight here. Herbert Burns is not a real MMA fighter. This guy has probably got pressured into fighting MMA because of his brother, because of his jiu-jitsu background. He is not. He doesn't fight. He doesn't have any resistance in him. He doesn't fight back. He is looking to get out of there at the first sign of resistance. So I just wouldn't recommend putting any money on Herbert Burns lately. This guy is flat out quit, gassed out, just looked absolutely pathetic in several fights in a row now. The only hope this guy has at winning is getting an early takedown and a submission, but if Jenkins can make it out of round 1, he's going to win. If Jenkins can stop the takedowns, he's going to win. I honestly think +500 isn't even good enough for any type of stab on Burns. 24-1 on Burns sub 1. it's a big number, but man, I really just don't think this guy has anything what it takes to win a fight. You saw him fight Erceg in his last fight. He just shot these weak little takedowns. He attempted a takedown. He didn't get it, and he's like, okay, I'm done. He didn't chain anything together. He didn't show any grit, and then he quit the first time he got hit in the head in the second round. So Burns is a pathetic bum. Jack Jenkins isn't really an aggressive striker himself. He throws a lot of leg and body strikes. He doesn't really headhunt too much. So these round 2-3 prices on Jenkins are horrible. I can't get behind them. Plus 200 or something like that for round 2, or plus 300 for round 3. Those are some of the worst odds I've ever seen for a round prop. It's 230 for 2, 500 for 3. Not good enough. Again, this is just an unbettable fight. Two fights in a row where I don't see any angle. It's just don't bet that fight. Moving on, we have a women's flyweight matchup, the only women's fight on the card, and it is going to be between Casey O'Neill and Luana Santos. Luana is the favorite at -140. Casey coming back +120. Casey coming off a bit of a rough run lately, facing her first losses in MMA. But she fought Jenny Mai, she fought Ariane Lipski. Both those women are good fighters. I think both those women would absolutely beat the brakes off of Luana Santos. So I don't think those fights are too relevant here. But, Casey's still young. She's still only, I think, 27. And, first losses in her career. I think she's now getting a little bit better of a step down. So I think Casey's going to make a better account of herself here. And Luana, I'm not convinced this woman is any good. I mean, she's ran through 2 bums in her UFC career. Agapova and Miller in the first round. And then her one fight that got extended versus Edgar, I thought was just a total snoozer, bore, clinch, push against the cage. She really didn't do much. She didn't land a lot of strikes. She didn't get many good positions on the ground. That was just a total clinch fest, terrible fight. And nothing she showed there impressed me. And I think that Casey O'Neill has a good chance at, dragging her out into an extended fight where Casey typically has really good cardio and puts up a lot of volume and can go hard in the second and third rounds. And I'm not exactly convinced that Santos can do the same. I think she could be a little front loaded. We could see her slowing down here. And I think Luana's best round will definitely be the first round, while Casey's will be the second and third. So I think Casey at plus is wrong. I think this should be a little bit closer to a pick'em. Me personally, I'm going to be waiting for Casey live, just because I think Santos is going to probably try to swarm her early on, either try to hit a takedown or hit her with some big punches. And I think that while they're fresh, Santos will have some success with that, and I think Casey will probably go out to a bigger underdog live, and then I'm going to look to jump in on her, because I think she has a good chance at coming back in the second and third rounds and winning by decision. Casey by decision is plus 250 compared to Santos by decision at even money. I think that is a very wrong disparity there. So I wouldn't knock any bets on Casey pre-fight. I think she's the side, and I'll actually go ahead and pick her to get back on track here with the decision win, where she starts a little slow, works her way into the fight, and outworks Santos in the second or third round. And also, Casey's not bad at finishing, right? She has good cardio, and she knows when to chase a finish, and she can get on top and throw some mean ground and pound, maybe even go for a submission. And they have her ITD line at even wider than Santos, which I think is wrong, man. I think the fact that she got finished by Lipski, I don't think that that's indicative of Santos being able to finish her as well, man. I really don't rate Santos too highly, and I think that she's certainly due for a loss here soon, and I think it could come here this Saturday versus O'Neill. So I'll be cheering for Casey to get back on track, and I think she has a good chance at doing so. We're moving on to the featherweight division, where we have Josh Culibao, Ricardo Ramos, where we have Culibao's the -150 favorite, Ramos coming back plus 130. Kind of a trend going on, I think, with some of these fighters. Several of these fighters are on multiple fight win streaks, losing streaks. Glenn, Reyes, Burns, O'Neill, Ramos, they're all on losing streaks. And Ramos has been looking particularly like quitter-esque in these fights. I mean, we've seen Jourdain out-grappled by guys before. We know he can be taken down and exploited by good grapplers. Ramos has, black belt, has shown good grappling in his career, and then he takes him down and gets guillotined. And you're like, it was just pathetic the way he did that. And then he's fighting Julian Erosa. Same thing happens, gets guillotined. And it just seems like Ramos does. The Jourdain one was really concerning because he didn't even fight that at all. He let Jourdain get that choke deeper and deeper, and he didn't do anything to fight the choke. Like, he completely, I don't know what went on there, but that looked like a quit job to me. And then the same thing, similar thing happened in the Erosa fights, man. So even though he's young, he's 29, I just have really, really considerate questions about Ramos's career and how dedicated he is to fighting. To add to that, he did some of his camps at Team Alpha Male in the past few years. This time, he's training in Brazil at some, just small town jiu-jitsu gym where he doesn't really have many pro fighters. And I really wonder what's going on. I don't know. I see nothing. Oh, don't forget, he was supposed to fight Austin Lingo, a fight that he was going to be a big favorite in. He missed weight by 9 pounds in that fight. So there's just a lot of red flags going on with Ramos. And he really hasn't won an extended fight in a long time. He looked okay in the Zubaira fight. He looked okay in the Algio fight, which he did win that one. But I think that was a pretty troublesome performance from him. And then he has some first-round finishes. But I think you really have to go back to 2019 Journey Newsom, a bum fighter, where he actually convincingly won a fight over 15 minutes. So I got nothing to be inspired by Ramos, and I wouldn't be just knock a total fade on the guy betting Culibao here. I think Culibao is the better striker. I think his defensive grappling should be solid enough to avoid getting taken down for long periods here. And how could anybody have faith in Ramos to grapple to a win here when he should have been able to do that in some of his recent fights, and he's completely failed to do so, and he's quit in pretty pathetic fashion. So maybe I'm being harsh on the guy. He is still young. He has room to bounce back, but I see no indicators of him being able to bounce back. So I got Culibao here. I think he's winning. I think minus 150 is fine for a bet for him, and it's just a total fade of Ramos here. So moving on to the last fight on the prelims, a banger in the heavyweight division, Jingliang-Prates versus Walter Walker. This isn't actually a banger. I was being sarcastic, but I'm interested in this one. Tafa minus 125, Walker coming back plus 105. Okay, first money line bet I'm stamping. I'm putting a stamp on this one, and we taking Walter Walker money line at plus money here. So it's a striker versus grappler matchup, right? Walker wants to get the fight to the ground. Tafa wants to keep the fight standing. Tafa's defensive grappling, dog shit. We saw him fight Usman, and he did okay defending the takedowns in the first round. The second round, he gets taken down flat on his back for 3 minutes. The third round, taken back down flat on his back for 4 minutes. He eventually got up in like the last 15 seconds of the fight, but he's just so fat and unathletic and bad at grappling that when he gets taken down, I think he is extremely likely to get taken down for long stretches. So he's a favorite, and you would have to lay juice on a fighter who sucks at wrestling, sucks at grappling, and is very, very prone to get stuck on bottom for long periods versus Walter Walker, who for a heavyweight, I think actually has decent wrestling, actually above average wrestling. And he has a decent top game. He knows how to control wrist and drag opponents back down to the floor. We saw him go to a back take to win the third round versus Brzeski. He throws some ground and pound in there occasionally. So he's not Daniel Cormier on the mat, right? But I think he is a far above average grappler, offensive grappler for the heavyweight division. And I had him winning the Brzeski fight. I had him winning the first and third round. Obviously, he lost the second. Obviously, he won the third. It all comes down to the first round. It was a round where Walker was on top for long portions, but he also did absorb a lot of strikes. It was a pretty 50-50 fight, but I think he could have won that decision easily. And I think if he did, the price would be looking a lot different here. And Jingliang-Prates also, he filled in on short notice versus Lima, right? Got his legs absolutely obliterated in that fight. That was only 6 months ago. And, we probably had to take a good amount of time off after that fight because he just got beat so badly. I just don't have faith that Tafa is going to be improving. I think he probably is the fighter he is. One last point here is when this fight is on the feet, you got to think that Tafa has the advantage, right? But he is such a wild swinger where he just wings punches. He's not the type of fighter to plant his feet and to jab and to stay composed like Brzeski. I mean, Brzeski's a bad fighter of his own right, but at least he knows how to plant himself, stay contained, stay disciplined a little bit, and throw combination punches. Tafa doesn't do that. Tafa wings shots, and he's going to get himself out of position. Even if he hits Walker, he hurts him with the punch, I think he's going to swing so wildly in an uncoordinated, flailing effort that he's probably going to leave himself open to be taken down. So, I think Walter has good upside here to just win the fight super clearly. Of course, Tafa can catch him and put him out, but if anyone is decisively winning the fight in a extended fashion, I think it's obviously going to be Walker, and I like him here for a decent bet, 1.5 units at plus money. Love that here. We are moving on to the main card. Fun main card here. Fun fight to kick it off as well. We are starting things off. Li Jingliang taking on Carlos Prates. Odds for this one: Prates minus 400, Jingliang plus 300. They're disrespecting the Leech here a little bit, man. Leech has been in the UFC for probably longer than any Chinese fighter in history. 17 UFC fights, 11-6 in that run. And he's, a 3-1 underdog here against Prates. And Prates is legit, man. A really good striker. And he's had a fun career to watch so far. He's only 2-0 in the UFC. But I don't think he's nearly proven enough to be 400 over Li Jingliang. So I think this line is slightly wide. But instead of playing Jingliang money line, I have a better angle on the fight that I like. And that is playing the fight to go long. The over 1.5, I bet at minus 165, still out there, available on some books at that price. And I also like Prates' over significant strikes, which is set at 40.5 at minus 115. I like the fight to start the third round at pick'em price, and I like the fight to go the distance at plus 160. So 4 bets here. I bet 3 of them so far. I haven't bet goes the distance yet. I'm going to wait to see the price on that one. But obviously, if Prates knocks him out early, I'm in trouble. But Li Jingliang, 27 pro fights, never been knocked out. He's been in the UFC 17 fights, never been knocked out. And he's fought some good guys, some solid strikers, especially recently. Zaleski dos Santos, Ponzinibbio, Salikov, D-Rod, Magny. I know that Prates is a skilled striker, but I don't really think the guy is some nuclear hitter. I think he mixes the strikes up really well, and he knows how to target the body really well. That would probably be my biggest concern, is a body shot. But the Leech is fucking tough, man. He's game. He's going to probably be in a competitive striking fight where he just comes up short to the quicker, younger guy. And Prates, I think, is probably just going to, outstrike Lee here. And I think it's going to be a Prates decision. I think Lee's going to be tough. He's going to be game, but he's not going to quite do enough to win these rounds. And I think it's going to be Prates, just landing 2-1 and outstriking him on his way to a decision here. But I just think a lot of this pricing is wrong here. Li Jingliang, 17 UFC fights, never been knocked out, and Prates is favored to knock him out. I don't think that's right. He's been in the UFC for 2 fights. One of those fights, he was losing a good portion of to Trevin Giles before coming back with his own impressive knockout there. So I would be looking to fade the Prates KO, to play the fight to go longer, and I wouldn't knock a stab on Leech, but I like my angle better on playing the fight to go long. I think that covers a lot of Jingliang's equity as well. And the last thing I'll say is Leech's no scorecards line is 3-1 here. Same point I've been making. He's never been knocked out, and yet he is somehow 3-1 in the no scorecards market. So a lot of goofy pricing there. I'm leaving myself a bit exposed if Prates does knock him out in the first round, but I'm willing to bet that he doesn't. And we're gonna move on. So. Heavyweight division next, Tuivasa, Rozenstruik. The odds for this one, minus 220 Rozenstruik, Tuivasa plus 185. Tuivasa's been looking troublesome lately, man. He's on a rough run, 4 losses, gotten finished in all 4 of them, submitted in 2, knocked out in 2, just been taking absolute beatings and looking terrible. But he did do this fight in Dubai. He did his training camp in Dubai. And, I believe he's an alcoholic, right? I think that's kind of a matter of record, right? He's a fat alcoholic. And I think probably, taking himself out of Australia, taking himself out of his comfort zone was probably a good move by him. I don't know what kind of training conditions he has over there in Dubai, but I think it is probably a good sign that he did that. He's fighting another striker. He's fighting a guy who's not going to take him down. Volkov and Tabura took him down and absolutely worked him on the mat. So that's good for him, right? He's fighting a striker who's going to keep it on the feet. And, Rozenstruik's not some, quick, devastating guy like Cyril Gane or Pavlovich, So I think this isn't the worst matchup on paper for him, but I'm going to be picking Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Just a much better striker, much more technical and well-trained. And Rozenstruik coming off an impressive victory over Gaziev, got... I wouldn't say beat up, but definitely lost the first round or 2 of that fight and battled back really well. And just settled into that fight really well. And Gaziev, we know, is a tough guy to deal with. We just saw him fight Mays, and he hit a lot of takedowns there and dominated from top position. And he puts up a lot of volume and aggression on the feet. He's definitely just not an easy opponent to deal with. And Biggie Boy dealt with him well. He weathered the early storm. He took over late. He showed good cardio and composure and striking in that fight. And I think that's what he has to do here, is weather the early storm. Watch out for the big winging punches of Tai Tuivasa, and just take the fight nice and slow. I think if he stays composed, stays within himself, I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be able to pick Tai Tuivasa apart here. I mean, we're talking about a very large disparity in striking skill, and I think Jairzinho should be fine here. Minus 220, I think that's an accurate pricing. And what's the over 1.5 here? That would be something I'd be looking to play. That's plus money. I mean, you gotta wonder that Tai could, walk into a knockout himself. He could be so aggressive, winging strikes, that he's gonna walk on to getting countered by Rozenstruik. But I think Rozenstruik's pace and the amount of strikes he throws, it looks pretty good for the over 1.5 at plus 160. So, that would be something I'd be looking to play there, is looking to play the fight to go longer. And you got to think Tai is probably going to come out a little less aggressive and wild than usual on a 4-fight skid. So, no official bets there, but I would be looking. The over interests me. I'm gonna contemplate that one a little more. We're moving on to the lightweight division, where we have Mateusz Gamrot taking on Dan Hooker. The odds for this one have Gamrot as the favorite, minus 360. Dan Hooker coming back plus 295. Interesting line here, man. I think this line is significantly off. And I think this is a good fight, good matchup. And again, the UFC not really doing any favors to the local fighters. I just mentioned Tai underdog. Now Hooker, a very big fan favorite over there in the Anzacs. And he's a 300 dog against Gamrot. So I like Hooker in this spot. I do. I think 300 is an absolutely insane line. And we know how this fight's going to look, right? Gamrot's going to be looking to take the fight to the floor, and he's going to hit a bunch of takedowns, but he's not going to do a whole lot with them. Hooker's going to get up, and it's going to be a matter of, did Dan land enough strikes to overcome the grappling of Gamrot? Judges historically have loved Gamrot. But in the Anzacs, with the crowd going wild, with Hooker, every strike he lands, the crowd's going to be going crazy. I think there's a good chance that Hooker can win this decision based on damage. I think it is very, very likely to go the full 15 minutes, as the line indicates, minus 240. And it's going to be a battle of takedown defense and aggression and output. And I just think Dan Hooker is pretty well suited to deal with. Well, he's not well suited to deal with Gamrot's grappling, right? Gamrot is no doubt the better grappler, the better wrestler, and will take him down. But I don't think Gamrot's going to dominate on top. I think Hooker's eventually going to get his way back to the feet, and Hooker knows how to show urgency. Remember in the Jalen Turner fight? I mean, he was down. He lost the first round. He got rocked in the second round, and he just kept, looking for opportunities, looking for his way in, and then he ended up hurting Turner with some strikes in the second, winning the second round, putting a beating on him in the third round. And Hooker's got good cardio. He's resilient. He's tough. And I think that this fight isn't so bad for him. I mean, Gamrot at near 80%. I mean, to get to that, you would have to think the Gamrot not only gets him down, he gets him down easily, he gets him down often, and he absolutely does good work from top position. And Mateusz Gamrot, he's been good to us. You know, Ozzy and I bet on him a lot throughout our run on the podcast, and I'm definitely up a lot of money betting Gamrot fights lifetime, but the guy doesn't do damage. He doesn't get great positions on the ground. He is just a chain wrestler with incredible cardio who will, just non-stop shoot as many takedowns as it takes. And it's possible that Gamrot can just backpack him and take him down and drag him back down over and over again, and Hooker is not going to ever be able to separate. That's obviously possible. I just think it's a lot less possible than minus 360 indicates. So I like Dan Hooker money line here. I think it's fine before the fight. I think you should be ready to add more live. And I just think this is going to be a close decision, man. I think that Hooker has some equity here being the hometown guy. And he's going to be the one landing damage. Gamrot's probably going to be holding on and wrestling, and I think it's going to come down to a very close decision. So, Hooker, money line Hooker by decision at 550 on FanDuel or DraftKings. I think that's good as well, and I like Dan Hooker in this spot, and I hope he pulls it off. Also, first fight, Dan Hooker with all the new tattoos. He got a shitload of tattoos before his last fight. He won it. And then he got even more tattoos before this fight, and let's see if the tattoos, bring him to victory here. Gamrot, I don't think has any tattoos, so that's something you should definitely consider in your handicapping here is the tattoo equity between these two. All right, enough about that one. Co-main event time, flyweight division. Kara-France, Steve Erceg. Odds for this one have it closely lined minus 170. Erceg coming back plus 145 to KKF Kara-France. Fun matchup here. Interesting that they're putting both these guys against one another in Australia, especially Kara-France. Well, they're both, coming off losses, but Kai is coming off of 2 in a row. And, they both need a bounce back, and it doesn't really make sense to me to match them up. But flyweight's a little thin right now. There's really not there's definitely not a definitive title challenger. It would have been Mokaev, but they cut him. So I think that the 125 title picture and just top of the division is a mess right now. And there's no real direction, so I can't entirely knock them for putting this fight together. I'm going to be interested to see who is the more hometown fighter here, because Kai is from New Zealand, right? Which is different country than Australia. I don't know if you knew that. Steve is from Australia, but Kai's more well known. He's been in the UFC longer, but Erceg was just in a title fight. So this is a good fight, man. I'm looking forward to this one. I have Erceg winning the fight. I think he is the better boxer of the two. I think he has the more grappling upside of the two, and I think if he hits takedowns here, he does have potential to get back takes, which we have seen Kara-France give up multiple times in his UFC run. And when I'm watching these two punch, I just see a big difference in the punching, the snap behind the punches from Erceg. And I think Erceg, he extends his punches a lot better. He puts more power behind them. And I think when Kai lands, I just don't think it has a lot of impact. I don't think he uses his reach too well. He kind of jams himself up on his punches, and I think Erceg, when he lands, he really fully extends his arms and gets good snap on his punches, and I think that's going to lead to him landing the bigger shots on the feet here. And I just think Erceg's a little bit more comfortable in there, even though he's so much less experienced. He's only been in the UFC for less than a year and a half. This guy fights really well composed, and he's just a fucking stud, in all honesty. He's impressed me throughout his UFC run. I thought he handled himself pretty well against Pantoja, even though he clearly lost. And I'm going to be picking Erceg to win the fight by decision here. And I think minus 170 has a little bit of value on it. I would cap him a little closer to 200 here. So I think Erceg is going to win the fight. And honestly, I think he's the side, too. I don't think it's dog or pass. The fight going the distance, heavily favored, minus 225. I think that's probably accurate. So the only downside of Erceg here is that it is going to go to this decision. You do have, two kind of favorable fighters. You don't know how the judging is going to look. There is possibility that the Kai can squeak out a decision here, but I think Erceg will be fine and will win the fight. And I definitely think we're going to see an Erceg back take at some point. Don't think he's submitting KKF, but I do think the back take is going to be like a round winning effort for Erceg here. So we're moving on to the main event in the middleweight division, the Premier division, the only fight in the Premier division on the card, and it is going to be between the champion Dricus du Plessis taking on former champion Israel Adesanya for, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, for the King of Africa. Ngannou and Usman have been taken down a notch lately, or a couple notches, and the real king of Africa will be determined here. The current king, I guess, has to be DDP. But as Benson Henderson once called himself, the former and future king, or some shit like that. We got some good build up here. You got some ethnic battling between the Nigerian and the South African. DDP has a claim, that he stayed in Africa, he trained in Africa, he became the champ in Africa, while Adesanya moved to Auckland and Australia and whatnot, trained there. That's what got him the belt. So it's a good one here. It is a good one. And I remember they had like that crazy post-fight interview in the cage one time too. that was good. Anyway, DDP coming off of his title victory over Sean Strickland. I rewatched that fight earlier today. I have DDP winning the fight, the second, the third, the fourth round. I actually put out a tweet about it, but DDP just wanted that fight more. It was a close fight on a round-to-round basis, right? It was obviously a split decision type of fight, but I just think DDP wanted it more. He was more active. He was more aggressive. He threw more strikes at consequential times in the fight. He hit a lot of takedowns in that fight, but he didn't do anything with the takedowns. He literally didn't do a single fucking thing with a single takedown, even though he hit like 6 or 7 of them without much trouble. But he didn't keep position. He didn't land any strikes. He didn't threaten with any submissions. They were largely worthless. But for a guy who we've questioned his cardio at times, his cardio in the 4th and 5th round was phenomenal. He did lose the 5th round, but the 4th round was his best round of the fight. He beat Sean Strickland up in that round. And for never having gone the full 25, and for a guy who in his early UFC run was kind of known for slowing down in fights and just looking really tired in the middle of the fight, I thought he handled himself fantastically in those later rounds. But I think this fight is a much, much different fight. So Sean Strickland, he spars. All he does is spar, right? So his fights end up looking like spars. Think about how many Sean Strickland fights we've seen lately in the past few years that have gone the full 5 rounds, that have been close, that have been just kind of pitter-patter fights that mimic sparring. And that's because he spars so much that when it becomes time to actually fight, he doesn't turn it up. He doesn't treat it like a fight. He treats it like another spar. And that's why DDP was able to land so many strikes and was able to get in so close to Sean Strickland, because Strickland obliges in that range. He's like, hey, we're sparring. We're going back and forth with each other. You hit me, I hit you. We'll have a nice competitive, even fight. And that's why we've seen so many of his fights be split decisions. I mean, the Cannonier fight, the Paulo Costa fight, which seemed like a clear win, was somehow a split decision. The DDP fight, split decision. Oddly enough, the only fight that was a really clear victory for him lately was the Adesanya fight, where he clearly won 4-1. But Strickland just had a good style to beat Adesanya. He fought behind the jab well. He used a lot of straight punches. He caught kicks. He defended kicks really well, and that was able to shut down a lot of Adesanya. Obviously, he dropped him in the first round, which contributed to Adesanya kind of shutting down for the rest of the fight. But I just think the striking distance in this fight is going to be so much different than both of their fights with Strickland. I think that DDP Izzy's going to want to maintain a little bit longer of a range, and DDP is going to want to try to come in that range. And I think that Adesanya is still going to be sharp enough and accurate enough with his intercepting shots and his counters to be able to punish DDP coming in. The leg kicks, the straight punches of Adesanya should be there. And the straight punches of Strickland were lighting DDP up for a lot of the fight. The first round, the 5th round especially. Even the 2nd and 3rd round are very competitive rounds. But if Adesanya just throws a lot of jabs and sits down on straight punches every time DDP comes in close, I think they're going to land. And if he can chop down the legs, the leg kicks, he should limit the movement of DDP. And the main question about this fight, I would say, is how is the grappling going to look? DDP surely is the better wrestler, but is he going to be able to use those takedowns and hit them to be able to do anything meaningful with it? And I lean towards no. We have seen Adesanya put on his back and flattened out at times and lose rounds, like to Blachowicz. Even fucking Alex Pereira hit a takedown and won a round off of him. But we've also seen a lot of guys shoot takedowns and get takedowns and fail, and Adesanya gets back up to his feet. Marvin Vettori did it. Robert Whittaker did it. And I think that's probably what's going to happen here. Is DDP is going to hit some takedowns, but they're not going to mean anything. They're not going to amount to anything. I don't think DDP is going to do a whole lot with them. And I think it's going to be because against the cage, because when DDP shoots, he tends to navigate towards the cage and then hit the takedowns, and Adesanya is really good at defending takedowns and getting back up against the cage. Open space is a different story. If DDP can hit a takedown in open space, then he would have a good chance at getting Israel flat and keeping him there and doing good work. But I don't think he's hitting those kind of takedowns. I think Adesanya is a little too aware and cerebral to be taken down in the center of the cage. And that's going to lead to me thinking the takedowns aren't going to be a factor. And I just do not think DDP is going to outstrike Israel Adesanya. DDP is an enigma. I have predicted this guy's fights wrong several times. The Robert Whittaker fight was one of the most surprising and shocking fights that I've ever seen. I just didn't think that was all possible, and the beating the DDP put on him in that fight, knocking him out, was just shocking to me. So I have predicted plenty of DDP fights wrong before, but that's not going to stop me from picking against him here. I will be picking Israel Adesanya. I do think Adesanya moneyline at Pick'em is a good bet, and I think that's the best bet of the fight. I'm a little interested in the fight going long, the over 4.5, the GTD at plus money. I think those are interesting, but I'm going to be passing on them, and I'm just going to be sticking with Adesanya moneyline. I'll pick Adesanya by decision as the official pick, but with how this fight with how I think it might look, I wouldn't be completely surprised to see Adesanya hurt DDP with punches and put him out here. So I think the best bet on the fight is Adesanya moneyline, and that will be the only bet on the fight for me. And the bets I really like here are the one I just mentioned, Adesanya moneyline, Dan Hooker moneyline, the over 1.5 and the overs in the Jingliang fight, Prates over significant strikes, Walter Walker moneyline. And that's the ones I'm really confident in. I think Keenan Song money line, Josh Culibao money line, those both interest. Oh, and Steve Erceg money line, those all interest me at the slight favorite price, but I haven't quite locked in a bet on them as well. But I do think they win, and I do think they are valuable at the current bet. So that'll do it for me. I will also one more bet. The overs in the Stuart Nicoll and Jenkins-Aguilar fight I think are good. So that's gonna do it. I'm looking forward to this card. I think we're off next week. It's the first time we've been off in a while, but I believe that is the case. Let me just double check real quick. No, we're not off. But the week after that, they are off. But so we'll be back next week with some more fights to talk about. But thank you all for listening. Hope you all enjoyed the podcast, got some good information. Hope you're all able to win some bets and enjoy the fights this weekend. I'll see you all before the next UFC card next week. Peace out, everyone.